We are recording.
Okay, just waiting another minute. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining Think and Disrupt, which is a forum for thought-provoking and innovative topics that is sponsored by the RMA, the Response Marketing Association, and thanks to the RMA for doing this. And so today I'm very excited. We're going to cover what I think is a very exciting and robust, ever-changing topic, which is really all about AI and the challenges and opportunities that CMOs face when they're considering how to apply some of the principles around artificial intelligence. And so I'm particularly excited and interested about this topic as a former CMO at a number of organizations, and it's something that we were always excited about, but weren't quite sure how to reconcile it from a data and analytics standpoint, as well as apply it and measure it. And so this should be a very exciting discussion today. And so the forum for today is we're going to take the first 40 to 45 minutes, and there'll be a discussion between myself and our special guest, Richard, which I'll introduce in a moment. And then we'll save the last 10 to 15 minutes for any questions that you may have. And so I think it's going to be a great day today. And so the question we're really going to uncover today is, how do you, as a CMO or marketing lead in any organization, embrace this new AI-driven paradigm, a world where disruption is everywhere and data is really at the epicenter of all things marketing related. And it does become a greater component of a marketer's toolkit about using AI to drive relevancy and engagement. So it's a very, very interesting topic. And so we're going to explore this topic today with a special guest, Richard Boire, who I'll introduce in a moment. He's a former colleague and board member with me on the Response Marketing Association, and an expert in predictive analytics and data science. So I'm really excited about the conversation today. But before I introduce Richard, I thought I'd just introduce myself. So my name is Lorne Solway. I'm the co-president of the Response Marketing Association. And the RMA is really a forum for active marketers interested in response efficacy. And we really do build response efficacy through education, networking, and advocacy at the Response Marketing Association. And so I'm very excited to introduce Richard. So Richard, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Lorne. Again, my name is Richard Boire. Not going to bore you with too much detail about my background, just to say that I've been in the predictive analytics and data science discipline for over 30 years. I was very fortunate. Most of you are probably saying, how can that be? Well, basically, I was very fortunate to begin my career with the pioneers, or with some of the company or corporate pioneers of data science and predictive analytics, i.e. the early direct marketing companies. I worked for Reader's Digest way back in the mid to late 80s, who were actually pioneers in terms of using predictive modeling and data science for all that so-called junk mail, that direct mail that we receive. I then went on to work at American Express in Toronto, who were really the first financial institution to take advantage and leverage data science in terms of building models. And that's really where I became a data scientist, because when I arrived, I was quickly told that I was no longer going to have the IT and systems department of a Reader's Digest, that I would have to do a lot of things on my own. So I had to learn how to code, which is what data scientists do today. So I had to learn how to pick up a language. The language at that time that I picked up was SAS. And basically, I was responsible for building all the marketing models at American Express back in the late 80s, early 90s. I then spent some time in credit. So I was in the credit risk area, where I learned more about risk modeling. So I was very lucky to land in organizations where I developed not only domain knowledge but just applied my data science skills towards other areas. Um, then I went on to work for a loyalty company, Air Miles, Loyalty One, and so I got loyalty type of experience. So got some really broad-based type of supplier experience, where I eventually went on my own in the late 90s, where I formed my own consulting firm with the ex-American Express colleague Larry Filler. We were the Boire Filler Group. We had a consulting business in predictive analytics and data science for 17 years. Um, we sold it to a data provider. I decided I want to basically be able to, to go back on my own. My first love has always been customized analytics. So I relaunched my company back 2000, the fall of 2019. I relaunched my own company called Boire Analytics, where I'm providing these customized analytics and data science services. I've probably gone already too far along anyways, but that's a little bit about my background in the Reader's Digest type version.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks, Richard, and so great to have you today. So as I said, I'm passionate about this topic and I'm so interested in it as a former CMO. So the first question I really had is around artificial intelligence as it's defined today. So there's a misnomer around what people describe as artificial intelligence. And so question is really, what do we mean? What do we mean by artificial intelligence as a context as it exists today? Like, why is it so popular and why are marketers embracing it?
Well, the reason it's so popular today, because the notion of artificial intelligence, and when I speak about artificial intelligence, and really those of us that are in data science or predictive analytics, we're really talking about deep learning and neural nets, the type of mathematics that's behind AI. And the reason it's so popular today, because I was studying this technology back in the 90s when I was working in American Express, is the fact that there were key breakthroughs that happened probably 5 to 7 years ago. One was our ability to process huge amounts of data, and which is really, like, if you think about it, which is really the oil of artificial intelligence. So the ability to process huge amounts of data allowed these deep learning and neural net techniques to really leverage their power. And so the first breakthrough was really in the area of, I know I'm kind of getting outside of marketing, but this is where where it really started, was in the area of image recognition, where back in the mid 90s, a lot of the research was getting 50 to 60% accuracy in terms of image recognition. And that was because of the inability to use large amounts of data. Because we were able to overcome that, fast forward 20 some odd years, these techniques could now take advantage of the oil that AI needed, which was large volumes of data. And all of a sudden we went from, 50, 60% accuracy to over 90% accuracy. And also in the area of NLP, natural language processing, is another area where we're seeing great advantages in accuracy. So it was these breakthroughs in image recognition that galvanized the whole interest and the power of artificial intelligence. Now I know we're going to ask some further questions, but this is, for those of us that have been in data science and predictive analytics, as I said before, these techniques are not new for many of us that have been practitioners for many years. But having said that, the increased accuracy of AI that's been seen in other applications has certainly galvanized an interest for data science and practitioners to look and see how that impacts within the marketing area.
So it almost sounds like, as you describe, the increasing amount of data, the oil, if you will, fueling the need for marketers to better embrace AI. And by definition, it's become more popular because of that.
That's right. It's when marketers or business people are seeing increased accuracy rates, the first thing they're going to think of is, how do I apply that to my business? It's very, very similar to when I built my first model way back in the late 80s. This is back in American Express, where they were just embracing the technology. Once we were able to demonstrate the tremendous impact of a model, all of a sudden I had all the other departments coming to me to see, how they could embrace predictive analytics or predictive modeling within their respective businesses. And that's because we were able to demonstrate the increased performance that the predictive models were able to deliver. So it's the same thing with artificial intelligence. When in the literature and in the newspapers, and you read these kinds of increased levels of performance with image recognition, it's natural for the businesses to say, how can we apply this within our own business.
So thinking back to, as you said, the origin of artificial intelligence, and really grounded in image recognition more than anything else. If you think of today's world, how is AI applied to the world of marketing, and what does it really mean for marketers today? Was image recognition, data being the oil that fuels this, but for a marketer today, what would your comments be in terms of what does it mean to them, and how do they need to think about it and reconcile AI?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm going to be quite transparent. I am not, and I repeat, I am not an image recognition expert nor an NLP expert. I've certainly been dabbling in that because of because I do have I am a data scientist, so my curiosity is always piqued. So I have looked at these techniques in other areas. I've downloaded Python code and looked at it, but my experience and where I'm providing value to clients is in the area of consumer behavior. So i.e. customer behavior and prospect behavior. And so I'm looking at these techniques in terms of how they provide increased levels of performance with regards to customer behavior or consumer behavior. So for example, if I'm building a retention model, i.e. defection model. I always start up with defection model because I think that it's always been my take that if organizations or companies are trying to build models, I think a quick win is to build defection or retention models, i.e. being able to identify those people that are most likely to leave. More importantly, those customers that are high value that are most likely to leave. So there are these, those of us that have been in the business for a while have been building these models for decades and have delivered pretty powerful models, i.e. in terms of lists. So can I target those customers that are most likely to defect? And so what you can do is you take a look at lift. Most marketers understand the concept of lift. Like if I did nothing, what's the average lift at, let's say if I target my top 50% of customers, what's my lift if I did nothing? If I were just, and I were to look at the 50% of the base, versus if I were to take a model and then apply it again to the same, to my customer base, and then target the top 50% with this model, how much incremental lift, i.e. how many more customers am I able to identify who are most likely to defect? So it's that difference in terms of identifying more customers at 50% versus random. And so you're always looking at that incrementality of lift between the model and what you did at random. So the way artificial intelligence would work would be, okay, here we've built a model and we've got incremental lift. Does a deep learning model provide incremental lift over and above what our traditional tools do in terms of incremental lift? And so that's those of us who are practitioners are always, we're scientists to begin with, so we're always looking at incrementality. Like at the end of the day, data science is a great discipline because there's no, I don't want to use there's no BS in data science. It provided that incremental
works or it doesn't. Totally.
Or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so the same with deep learning models. When I've developed models using traditional techniques, I have looked at deep learning techniques to see if I'm able to get that incremental lift in terms of increased performance. And that's what I have to communicate, or that's what I would have to communicate to a marketer or to a business person to say, yes, there is indeed significant levels of performance provided by this deep learning tool. So I would work with somebody like yourself and say, here we have traditional models, but we've developed this AI tool, and we're getting this kind of incremental lift, which we then can translate into ROI. What is incremental ROI based off these new tools? And that's just, I know you're going to ask another question.
Well, I like where
that's just the increased level of
Yeah.
performance.
But I like the other area you were going, sort of interrupt you, which is really interesting, and it's a big issue for all marketers, right? Especially in a period where engagement and loyalty is always questionable. But you talked about, for lack of a better word, churn mitigation, right?
Right.
Being able to identify propensity for those that would potentially leave your brand. And I love when you talked about the application of AI, better informing a propensity model around folks that potentially could churn off of your brand. And so you could use predictive analytics to better identify and target those folks to make sure and offer them either content or offers to keep them engaged in your brand.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I think is such a relevant topic right now, given the current ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah. And retention models and defection models have always been, in my, in my background, or at least based on my history, the most powerful, because you're looking at, basically you're looking at previous historical engagement / transaction behavior. So whether it's offline or online behavior, you're looking at all that previous activity to see, how likely they are to be engaged going forward. Are they likely to be unengaged, which is really what you talk about, churn or defection. And so these models, can become very powerful. And so it's a question, it's a question of, how much more incremental lift do we get with the deep learning tool versus what we already have. And data scientists do have different tools that are available to them to monitor that, and to really demonstrate that that these tools really work. I mean, the challenge that I found, and we can discuss, we may want to discuss this further, but the challenge that I found in the consumer behavior versus, let's say, image recognition. In consumer behavior, the challenge is we have a lot of behavior which is very, very random. Like, consumers do things, you could almost call it unexplained behavior. They'll do things
Consumers are
randomly.
irrational, right?
Right, the irrational. So
Totally
exactly, Lorne. There's a lot of irrationality in terms of consumer behavior, which is baked into our models. So it's unlike, and this is where I'd love to have debates with data scientists. This is unlike image recognition, where you're trying to, classify an image, where you don't have that irrational, I think it's a better word, that irrational type of behavior in trying to predict an image, or in trying to predict text. Whereas in consumer behavior, you have a lot of irrational behavior. And these models, if you I've done a lot, like a lot of my fellow colleagues, we've all done a lot of reading and apply them. These models work very well. As I said, I talked about data, volume of data being the oil. And the second is there has to be a pattern. The stronger the pattern in the data, the more powerful these models are. So it has to find that bump. And in a lot of the world that marketers live in, that bump, there is a bump, but the bump is perhaps not as clear as in other applications, business applications like image recognition or NLP.
Yeah, it's a great point. So getting very excited about this, because you hit on a passion point of mine for sure. And so particularly with predictive analytics, as you rightfully said, image recognition, you get a better sense, there's patterns. If you use the premise for marketers, for consumer behavior, consumers are predictably irrational. They are, right? And so Do you see in the future use of AI the application of behavioral economics? Like, does it take into account behavioral science and heuristics and how humans think? Because they do. We all of us think irrationally, right?
Right.
We're almost on autopilot. We wake up every morning, we brush our teeth, we have behaviors that are so ingrained that it's hard to shake us out of those behaviors, and so we process data and information um, differently and irrationally. And so how, in your mind, like, what does that mean for marketers in terms of the application of AI? And when we're doing predictive models, does behavioral economics and heuristics or behavioral science, does it factor into that in any way, in your opinion?
Well, it can only be factored again is if we can capture the data, right? So again, we talked about my attitudes and my interests regarding history, right? So unless you can capture that data. Now, if you're Amazon, you would be able to capture that
Totally,
data
yeah.
totally because of my books, right? So again, it goes to what kind of data can you collect? But does Amazon also know that that I'm a big time jock? Like I played sports all my life. Amazon's not going to know that been playing old timers hockey since I've been 20 up until my age now.
Which is
Now,
25.
POHL, my Pickering Old Timers Hockey League would know that, but Amazon's not going to know that. So that's part of my, these are all things that are part of who I am. Like or even my political involvement. I volunteer in my writing. So all these different touch points that I have. Unless you can, and these speak to my behaviors, like all my different involvements, my
Well,
reading
isn't that
interest.
in the oil, Richard? Like, you talk about the oil, in theory, it
It's
would be in the
but
oil,
you've
right?
got
The data.
but you've got to integrate that, Lorne.
Totally.
You have to be able to capture or integrate that. So
What advice would you give to a marketer on that point? Like, how do you go about that? Like, how do you leverage?
so so what I've typically have advised marketers is when you're building models, you basically look at the behavior that you're capturing. So you're targeting the who. But I think what you're getting to is like, how do I get inside the mindset of and so this is where I believe that the area of market research, and I've touched base with the market research community. The market research community this is their opportunity to try and get at more of that type of information, which gets at the why consumers
Totally.
do things. And so you can then take that information, and what data scientists do is take that information that we're collecting from market research and then overlay it to our target segments. So what I mean by that is, if I have, let's go back to the defection. Supposing I have a list of customers that are most likely to defect. I could take market research information and overlay that to that target segment, and in a very broad way, come up with different communication strategies based on the market research information that I'm able to overlay. So I might be able to find 3 different themes that I could talk to, because all I have with the target group is just, these are my who. But what about the why? So the market research information would be very useful and again, it's a very, you're looking at things broadly, but can I speak to different groups within my target segment differently? And that gets into, as you were talking about before, like the why, like, okay, the fact that, Richard, maybe there's a group that are more, that they're more engaged in print versus, let's say, digital.
So segmentation and advanced personas.
Yeah, and but being driven by market research and really getting into the why. So on the web, digital's never going to be able to provide, in my opinion, that why. I think this is still the purview of market research, is to really look into that, because
So I love this. So it sounds like what you're saying for marketers, if we were to translate it into advice, one would be take the oil, the data, and get as much oil as you possibly can as informed. and then supplement it with adjacency work around market research, qualitative or quantitative, to get a more robust view, which will make the models, the predictive analytics, that much more effective.
Right.
Is that sort of it in a nutshell?
Yeah. That's, and again, yeah, it's it's as I always, when I was brought up I came from the direct marketing. Now everything's digital, but coming from the direct marketing was always, I think we always remember those three P's, which was the product, the offer, or no, the offer, the list, and the message, right?
Cool.
And so the message, that hasn't changed today. Like I teach a digital course at George Brown, and I keep harping that hasn't changed today. The list is who we're targeting, so AI. The then you have the offer, which is the product, and then the message is the communication, which is, as you say, how do we speak to the different segments, within the list.
Yeah, that's great. So another question that I had, which is on every marketer's mind, I would think, and I know I've gone through it. So I'm leading a marketing organization. I'm a senior marketing role, and I'm very excited about this notion of using AI, artificial intelligence, and integrating it into my marketing mix. And I got to go to my boss, my CEO, or my director of marketing, or my VP of marketing, and I've got to build a case for embracing artificial intelligence and integrating it into my marketing mix. And it normally comes back to, okay, so how do you measure it? Like, how do we know the AI, that embracing AI is really effective for the organization? What would your comments be around how to measure AI?
Again, go back to what I was saying just earlier. Number one, it's okay. What are we measuring? What behavior are we trying to optimize? And number two, we're looking at increment. Okay, guys.
I think you're fading a little bit. I don't know if everybody can still hear me.
You there?
I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we're looking at basically, again, if you're trying to make a case, how do these models, how does a deep learning model perform incrementally above and beyond what we're traditionally doing? So again, that's with customer behavior. Now, marketers will also, this, the notion of that you have applications and digital applications that marketers are using, like chat boxes, things at the call center. So there's a lot of tools that AI can provide in terms of NLP, in terms of like how do we communicate to customers, which is okay. So
I think you're breaking up a little bit, Richard, but we'll just try to stay with it.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So so again, customers are, so again, you have applications like chat boxes and dialogues that marketers have been using with their customers for years. And AI offers the ability to do natural language processing in terms of like, how do we more intelligently reach out to customers in terms of saying the right thing. So this is where this gets outside trying to optimize consumer or customer behavior. This is really trying to optimize the text, trying to optimize the message based off based off the consumer's dialogue. So the AI tool is taking a look at what the previous dialogue has been, and then determining what next to say. So, okay, so I'm going to stop using my video here. How's that?
Yeah, it's
Is that
better.
better?
Hey, so Richard, so based on that, then could you build, like if you needed to present a business case, let's say to your boss as a marketer about embracing AI, like what would your best advice be on the best way to measure, like as a control group, what would be the best advice in terms of how you actually put a test case in place to really show the benefits of AI?
So one, the number one thing I would look at again is I would take a look at what are we traditionally doing, i.e., with traditional tools. What kind of increased level of performance do we get? And then I would say, okay, now let's try a deep learning tool and see did we get incremental lift, i.e., are we able to identify more defectors? So that would be number one. The other, so besides increased level performance, it's also how much time did I save? With these new tools, like with a lot of these tools are now automated. Do I do I reduce the amount of time through artificial intelligence? Do I increase? Do I improve the level of time that it takes me to produce a solution? So that would be another advantage. So it's the
Oh,
increased
that's
level of performance.
interesting. So a measure, I hadn't thought of it, but quite that way. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. So you
So
could argue that velocity, you can increase your velocity in getting to outcomes with AI.
exactly. So could I do that much quicker, right? Vis-a-vis, because a lot, as I said, many all these tools are now very much automated, and again, you have to be careful. I don't want to. It gets into another topic, but which gets into, okay, then it becomes a black box. And AI, one of the knocks against deep learning and AI is that it's very much a black box, because you have inputs going in, and then you have a solution, and
So this is interesting.
you
So
don't necessarily know what that solution is. But I can communicate to you, Lauren. I can say, by the way, I built. So let's get away. We've talked about defection. Suppose you ask me to build a response model, somebody that's most likely to buy an RSP.
yeah,
Or I know you used to work with telco, so somebody that's most likely to buy a certain plan.
yeah.
Okay, so you come to me, okay, Richard, I need a response model that's trying to convert somebody. We're trying to upsell this person to buy this type of plan. Okay, so I build a response model, and I can show you that with traditional tools, I'm able to, at a given cutoff, I'm able to increase response rate by 30%. So I'm able to show you that with the model, and we can translate that to ROI. I develop a deep learning model. How much more, how much above and beyond 30% can I deliver to you? That's really what I'm looking for. That's pure incremental lift. There's also the time. Like, did it take me less time to produce that? Or maybe it took me more time, but I can live with that because I got better lift. But, and I use the but you're then going to say, okay, well, what's inside the model, which is probably another topic we want to explore,
Yeah,
because
we will explore that in a minute, but I like where you're going. Like I do think that the one of the advantages that you brought up, obviously, which is velocity, right? In an ecosystem now where we've all got compromised resources, right? COVID has depleted human resources, and we're all probably to do more with less. It's very interesting to the point that you just raised, potentially, that you can embrace AI as a tool, and you could get to the answer a lot faster, probably with a lot less heavy lifting, providing that the data is in place, as you rightfully said earlier.
yeah, which gets into a whole other dynamic, which I want to pay some lip service to, because anybody that's been in database digital / direct marketing is always been aware at the end of the day, it's the data. And
Totally.
80 to 85 to 90% of our time is spent, organizing the data in the right way to feed into these AI algorithms. So that is I call it the elephant in the room when you're building these types of tools, is, do I have it organize the data? Like we had mentioned, okay, like AI needs volumes, like large volumes of data, which it does, but it needs to be organized in the right way as well. It's the old GIGO theory, as we all know: garbage in, garbage out.
Totally. So you need a very profound data strategy. So it will segue into another question that I had, which is really, and I think you're touching on some of these. So for a marketer who's embracing AI, if you were to talk about the pros and cons of adding that into the toolkit, what would be on the pros list and what would be on the cons list? Because I think you're starting to touch on some of these things.
The pros of AI is its mathematical power. It's most advanced in terms of machine learning, in terms of the machine being able to learn and not having any sort of bias as to whether a distribution is linear or log linear. It doesn't have any of those kind of sort of predispositions. It's basically learning from the data and trying to produce an optimized solution. And again, this is for those of us that are practitioners, you need to be very, very disciplined in having training, testing, and validation data sets so that your model doesn't overtrain, which I don't want. That's a more technical topic, but you need you need to have these are anybody that's building tools needs to have sort of that that foundation, those types of skills, in terms of building these tools is do I first of all, do I have the right people that can build these tools? And again, what kind, do I have, if I'm organizing, if I'm looking at the data, how do I have the right processes, the right people in place to create, as I always say, that analytical environment to do AI? Because if you don't have the right analytical environment, no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to do any meaningful AI.
Yeah, it makes sense. So if I were to sum these up, so it sounds like what I heard you say in terms of the pros. So it sounds like the mathematical computation ability as a pro, speed to market would be a pro, accuracy would be a pro, predictive nature of AI would be a pro, and then incrementality or churn mitigation, the ability to do all those things. And then on the con side, it sounds like things like resources. You'd have to have the right resource pool from an analytical standpoint.
Right.
You'd have to be able to build either a data warehouse, data strategy, sometimes a data architecture to be able to house all this oil that you refer to the data as. And then finally, you need to have strong analytical capabilities to be able to pull it off.
And I think just to add one more is you need those hybrids, the people that can act as the bridge between the business people,
absolutely,
and and what I would call the more technical type of people. This is the real future, and I think this is where a lot of data science is going to head. Being able to craft those hybrids that understand the tech, understand the math behind data science, but then also understand the business in terms of its application and how it can deliver
it's such
value.
Richard, that's such a great point, because if you think about the technological revolution that we've just gone through, right, and even I know AI has been around a while, as you said, with image recognition, but in a lot of organizations, you do need someone that's able to bridge sort of the product, the technology side, and then communicate it clearly to the rest of the business, because otherwise it gets too technical and it just falls apart. So I think that's such a great addition.
Which the other one component we didn't, one other con which I failed to, I just remembered, which I failed to point out, which is key in terms of deep learning and AI. And it's a con right now, is model explainability. How do you explain these tools to the business? As I was saying before, a neural net model is basically a bunch of awares. You input variables, and you could have a 50 to, you could have a 20 to a 50 hidden layer solution. And so what does that mean when you get to the final output? Like, what does the final solution look like? Now, there's work being done. There's work being done in that area. I'm not sure, based on what I'm seeing in the literature, that it's really addressing the the point that how do we explain, the importance of variables within a deep learning model.
Yeah.
The reason I say that, Lorne, is for those of us that have been practitioners, we've always been able to explain the importance of a model. You worked for, you worked in a telco. Anybody, those people have worked in banks, telcos and banks have always been leading edge in this area. In any type of model development, the business would always understand, okay, Richard, you've built this new response model. What are the key characteristics comprising that response model?
Yeah,
And so I
totally.
need to be able to answer that.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to communicate that to the business people so that they're comfortable. And I need to be able to demonstrate
Yeah.
why those variables are in the model. It's not good enough to say, well, just trust the solution.
Totally hear you. So
I've
you're pivoting.
never. I grew up. I was very fortunate to have mentors and bosses that always grounded me in. You have to be able to explain your solution.
Yeah,
And,
totally.
and,
So you're
and so it's
pivoting
the
into
same way with
another
deep
area.
learning.
You're
It's the same
pivoting
way
into
with deep
another
learning.
area that I think is really, really important. I just want to segue into, which is, with marketing automation, we all went through as marketers, right? When marketing automation sort of hit fold, it had a profound impact on organizational structure, types of resources, talent, how we would structure our marketing teams. So with AI, what would your point of view be on the impact of organizational structure? Like what types of resources do you think would go away and what type of resources do you need to contemplate moving forward? Some of what you just sort of touched on.
Well, I don't think. I think if you're in a role right now where you're doing repetitive type of tasks, um, I would look to other horizons or look for areas where I really need to use my thinking in terms of trying to solve problems. If you're doing and even if you're a programmer, if you're simply doing the same type of program and because you have a technical skill, a lot of these a lot of these tools are now being developed which are really taking away sort of that the programmer's monopoly in terms of crunching through data. Like, I did, I sure I'm a programmer. The other day I was teaching George Brown, and I thought it was cool. I was able to write some Python code where I was able to go in and scrape the web. And I was looking at sentiment analysis on Trump for the last couple of weeks, and I was all happy
Tell
about
us.
that. I was all happy about that because I could do it in Python, right?
Yeah.
But there are tools. There are two very simple tools out there that could do that, a ton of them. And so this is this is where the new paradigm
Yeah.
is marketers and young people much younger than me who are adept at using these tools, but being able to understand how to use not only how to use these tools, but trying to understand what's the end objective and how do I craft reports. So when I'm teaching, I'm always going back, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How are you organizing the data? And then you can have a tool which you use to do that. So you're looking at people that are adept at using tools. I think people coming into marketing today definitely need to be numbers oriented. It's not like the Mad Men days where somebody who wasn't numbers oriented just said, okay, you're in marketing. I remember I have a funny story. 20, I guess it was 20 or 25 years ago. I was doing some work with an agency, and they were a creative agency, and of course they knew me as the data scientist. And the head of the agency used to always say, "Oh, here comes Richard. He's going to give me a headache with all those numbers." That was a long time ago, but it's the world has changed since the mid 90s, where you had agencies that said, "Oh, here comes Richard, he's going to give me a headache with all those numbers." Marketers today need to embrace numbers. So again, people that are numbers oriented, can solve problems.
That's where
Those are the types of jobs going forward.
Yeah,
If you're
makes
doing
sense.
something
We got some good questions coming in
repetitive,
from the
so just
audience
let
now.
me end. If you're doing something repetitive, I'm just saying, look to do something that requires more thinking,
Okay.
because those jobs are going to be automated away.
Okay, that's helpful. So thanks for that. We've got some questions that have come in from some of the audience members. So I'm going to ask them on their behalf. So the first one, Richard, and I'll go through these quickly. What's the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence?
That's a good question. The machine learning, my definition, and again, you talk to some data scientists, maybe they'll give you a different definition, but my definition is that artificial intelligence, as I've described it here, is really about deep learning and the use of neural net mathematics. So that is a subset of machine learning. So machine learning, just so I define that, machine learning is the concept of the machine actually learning on its own and providing an outcome. So a good example, I don't want to get too technical, but I use this when I presented at other conferences. A good example for those of you that are technical, um, all of you have heard of regression analysis. You've taken basic stats. Well, within that, there is a routine called stepwise regression, which basically what that does is you throw in a whole bunch of characteristics, and the machine, if you're using stepwise, the actual machine goes through each variable by itself and tries to determine, is it optimizing the solution? And it either includes it or it doesn't. The user's not doing it. The machine is determining based off the parameters that the user sets. So the machine is actually learning on its own to produce an optimal solution. In the case of stepwise regression, there's a lot of constraints that are imposed on that. Deep learning is doing the same thing, except there's less constraints. It's not trying to optimize a linear type of regression that stepwise regression might do. It's actually trying to optimize the difference between the predicted and the actual. So there's a number of different techniques. So in machine learning, you'll have various forms of mathematics like logistic regression. You'll have SVMs, you'll have decision trees and shade, random forest. You'll have a whole bunch of SVMs, discriminant analysis. You'll have a whole bunch of mathematical techniques that are actually called machine learning, of which neural net and AI are a subset.
Okay, that's excellent. So it's a subset of machine learning. Perfect. Thank you for that. Very helpful. Had another question, which I think is really interesting, actually. It's more around the contemporization of AI. So can you speak to any brands as best practices that are using AI today, and how are they using it? Like, are there any that come to mind, Richard, that you've come across in your practice?
I would say that for the most part, it obviously the tech companies are, as we all know, like the Facebook and Netflix, because totally.
All the FANG companies.
What's that?
All the FANG companies.
The
Facebook,
FANG companies, for
Amazon,
sure. The banks. So some of the those companies that were leading edge in terms of predictive analytics are the ones that are looking. We certainly have AI as part of their toolkit, and so they would be, that would be within their arsenal. Telcos, the big telcos like Rogers, TELUS, they would certainly all be embracing AI. The retailers, some of the again some of the larger ones, the larger retailers, and particularly the digital ones. Anybody that's got more of a digital presence in terms of retailing would
like the e-com stores you're referring to?
Yeah, the e-com. Although I think some of these, and they're not. It's hard to understand exactly what kind of mathematics they're using. You find out with a lot of these companies, they call it AI, but they're using basically mainly another tool, and then branding it as AI as opposed to really deep learning. So again, you have to get under the covers with a lot of these companies to really understand, is it a real deep learning tool, or is it logistic regression, or is it a decision tree? Sure. Which are all great tools in trying to predict a given behavior.
What about loyalty companies? Would you say, like, if you look around the loyalty landscape, and I would think of brands like RBC Rewards or Air Miles or Air Canada with Aeroplan, would those companies, in your opinion, be embracing AI?
They would all, Lauren, they would all be embracing, or at least looking at it. But I think, these companies would be not throwing away the baby with the bathwater, for lack of a better phrase. So they would be embracing it, as I would be embracing it as another tool, as another tool in my toolkit. And
Okay,
so,
got it.
again, any company that's got we touched on this, early in the conversation. Any company that's got large volumes of data would certainly be looking at this as a potential tool to improve
Okay,
performance,
great.
but would not, and I repeat, would not be throwing away their other types of techniques.
Okay, so I want to pivot into a rather sensitive topic. It's something I know we've chatted about at the Response Marketing Association quite a bit, and it's really around data and privacy. And so, as you
Right.
rightfully said, when we started thinking about the fuel for AI, the oil, if you will, is all in the data. As brands start building out more progressive, predictive models, really leveraging AI, what are the implications for data and privacy with Castle and PIPEDA and GDPR? Do you see that being a crossroads between AI and data privacy?
It's the same issue that we had, in the old days when we were building predictive analytics models. It's really about the data that we're collecting. The fact that we're using, an AI tool, or I'm using a decision tree, doesn't make a difference to the consumer. What the consumer is interested in is the fact that you're using my data, and how are you using it. So when I was with another association where we were looking at, when PIPEDA was being introduced about almost 20 years ago, or 15, 20 years ago, I was part of the panel, as a practitioner, and trying to look at what did this, what does this mean from a privacy standpoint. And as long as the consumer, and again, it shouldn't be buried, as long as the consumer is aware of that their data is being used, and it's being used and it's being reasonably used for the right purposes. So again, if a classic example is, if I'm a not-for-profit and I'm developing models for the not-for-profit, but let's say I use that data to sell them credit card products.
Right.
That would be, like, that may be, if you're a consumer, if I get some kind of communication from, let's say, Canadian Cancer about getting a credit card because they have the data, that's, you could argue from a consumer standpoint that's unreasonable, right? The consumer had no reasonable expectation that Canadian Cancer would use my data to come up and offer me a credit card. So again, it has to be how would you reasonably use this data for analytics purposes? But again, you take a look at, like all these apps that are out there where they're trying to circumvent the privacy laws, and it's buried on page, when you download the app, right? There's a contract, and it's buried on page 18 that, these apps are, will sell your data or make their data available to other apps. And most people don't seem to care about that. I mean, that's the world we live in. So somebody just says, click, I want the app. Buried on page 18 is the fact that app, that they can give. And I think that needs to be, I'm not sure that needs to be, I think there needs to be a lot more robustness in terms of, like, how, especially in the digital world, like how consumer information, can be transferred.
So that's what I'm wondering, like, for marketers that are listening, right? When you think about it, so if you think of all the data sets, whether it's zero party, first party, second party, third party data, as you rightfully have said, right? Again, data is the oil that fuels AI. Do you think Is AI going to exasperate the issue around data and privacy? Like, does it make it a bigger problem, or it's the same problem just dressed up differently? And I ask it only because with GDPR and increased regulation and California law, the fines and the reprimands around getting it wrong become increasingly risky for a marketer. And so does AI exasperate that, or is it really the same problem just dressed up differently?
I think it's the latter, but it's still creating more of an issue because AI is so front and center that even people, friends of mine come up to me, and they hear about artificial intelligence, they hear about Big Brother, and because there's so much talk about artificial intelligence, it's 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 raising it's raising that awareness level about privacy because AI is so all pervasive. So people, I have friends of mine that I work with on different volunteer committees that are saying, like, I'm concerned, like how are organizations going to use my data because they now have all these tools that they can predict, and I think there's some misnomers about how accurate the information can be used, but nevertheless, data is there to be used, and people are more aware of that today than ever, because of the talk and the talk and discussion that's revolving around
But this is
artificial intelligence.
interesting, right? So, and this was a comment that came from the audience, right? That you could argue that one of the questions, the user, the consumer is not fully aware of what AI is really doing with their data. So
Right.
it's hard to be honest with the consumer because it's all built up in a model. So
Mhm.
how do you, and maybe it's a rhetorical question, like how do you get proper consent? Like how do you, because it's an AI, you don't really understand how your data is being used, or
Well,
maybe is it an issue, or maybe it's not even an issue.
I think, to me, it's transparency. I mean, I come from, again, I come from the direct marketing area where, it was maybe less intrusive. Like I always used to, back in the early days, Rich, I'm getting all this junk mail. I hate it. I said, well, if you don't like it, here's a number to call and get your name off the list if it's impacting privacy.
Yeah.
So
So owning your data and owning your, yeah.
yeah, it's just so again, I think there needs to be, I do think there needs to be a stronger level of governance in the digital sphere, because it's much easier for us to simply click without understanding what we're giving away. And again, I mean, I talked, I don't know, but I have my kids, a lot of my kids don't seem to care,
Yeah,
that
totally. Yeah.
their data, and it may be a generational thing, or maybe
Control
we haven't,
you're in control.
or we haven't really we haven't evolved to that point where we really understand what's at risk. And I think it may be the latter, that we
Yeah, I think
really
you're right.
haven't understood totally what's at risk. We're still kind of in evolution mode. I mean,
Yeah.
that's my humble opinion, but we're still in evolution mode about what really is at risk here. And I speak, I'm also speaking for the millennials too, because it's just like, yeah, well, I want the application, just give it to me now, without an understanding of how this information can be used by companies. Because I've been in the data game for 30 years, and I can tell you as a data scientist, your objective, and I repeat, any of you data practitioners, your objective is to try and integrate all the data as much as you can to that particular person. That is the end objective of the data scientist. And then from there, you then start to use artificial intelligence and all the various tools. But our first objective is to try and put as many data points as we can. That's what Cambridge Analytica did a number of years ago. Is
Yeah,
they did
totally.
exactly what I'm discussing. They put all those data
Yeah.
points together that they could get at the consumer, and boom, they
Fine. Two more
saw what
quick
happened.
questions. This is great, Richard. A segue question and just a comment. So people really don't have any idea what's really being done with their data. And your point is that you got to be in control of your own data, it sounds like. But the second last question I had is really around, and this is important, this came in from the audience as well. So what do you think is next? Like based on your expertise, on AI, what's the next paradigm? Is there something new that's around the corner, or is it an evolution of what's being done today? Like what's next in the field of AI and machine learning as it applies?
Well, technically speaking, there's a lot of work that's being done around the area of reinforcement learning, which is, a component of artificial intelligence. And that's looking at basically you have a state, so you have a given condition, and I don't want to get, we only have a minute or two, but basically what you're using reinforcement learning is given the fact that I have a state, whether it's whether it's ads, whether it's an event or a customer, what do I do next? What is the optimal thing that I should do next to that customer? What should be, I have an event today, I had some events yesterday. What should I do next in terms of promotions for tomorrow?
Got
And
it.
so there are companies doing that. Again, I'll go back, you mentioned this, I'll go back to measurement. I think, business people and marketers and data scientists, to me, I always go back, let's explore these techniques, but let's also understand how we measure that indeed these techniques are working, rather than I've heard from the past, well, it's working. Well, how do you know it's
Got it.
working?
Yeah.
It's
No,
just
it
the
makes sense.
math. No, you have to show me that it's working.
Last question for you. Um, Again, this came from audience. It's a good one, actually. It's regarding the US election. So when we see these forecasts on the Democrats and the Republicans and what the maps look like, are they using predictive analytics or AI? Is that an application of AI in its in its basic format, in your opinion?
As far as I know, this is my opinion, it's basically just doing, the surveys, the typical surveys that they've done in the past. Where AI might be used and is being used by both those parties is to say, okay, given all the data that we've had and all the data that we know, what areas, and not only, what, call them electoral districts, what electoral districts like within Pennsylvania should I go after?
Yeah.
So that's where data scientists are working, like on Joe Biden's campaign, to say, based on what we know, boom, you should be spending all your ad money here, you're targeting here, and the same thing's happening with Trump. Trump's has got a very, very narrow road to victory. So his data scientists are trying to figure that in to say, okay, given your narrow road to victory, here are the areas that you should be focusing on in terms of
Makes a lot of sense.
campaigning.
Well, thanks, Richard. I think we're out of time, but this was, I know for me, it was, hope for everybody else, it was so helpful, and really appreciate
Great.
you taking the time. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. And to those that are listening in, just wanted to thank you for joining us. And as I said at the beginning of this, the RMA presents these Think and Disrupt sessions, which are really built around provocative marketing topics, where we want to dig in all around the notion of becoming better and more effective marketers on the response efficacy side. So look for these coming up over the next number of months. And on behalf of everybody, I just want to say thanks for attending, and look forward to seeing you at the next Think and Disrupt session. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Richard. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you, Lorne. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.